Righty. All right. Well, thank you all for showing up here on a Saturday afternoon. Oh, that's right. It's Thursday. Um, and I hope everyone has the stuff that Caitlin has sent to us that we sent to her. And I want to jump right in and talk about, I don't want to talk about it, but I want us to talk about what our priorities should be. So because we should have a plan set up for our business meeting, which is the week after next. But we have these topics, and so what do you think? Have you looked at has everyone gone through this? And then Caitlin put this, I don't know what this is called. What is that called, that thing?
It's just a chart.
It's chart. She put this wonderful chart together. And it seems as though we all agree that social and emotional learning is the number one. Do we agree with that? And I don't, I'm a teacher retention person, but I don't think teacher retention is number one. And it seemed from the teacher survey that I think that people's ideas of their administration during the pandemic is different than it was before the pandemic. Would you agree with that, with the teachers you talk to and the principals that you talk to, that the way they feel about the leadership and the way the leadership feels about the teachers has shifted? Because I know that this is the only time in my history as an educator that the principals and the teachers are on the same page as far as what the system is doing. That's never happened before. If teachers were thinking about, I was involved in 2 strikes. One was successful and one was horribly unsuccessful and cost us teachers a lot of money that we lost. But now it seems as though teachers and principals are on the same page as far as what they need and what they're not getting and what they're not hearing. I'll shut up. You don't have to be on mute, anybody. We can all be on. We don't have to raise our hands.
You don't know what kind of party is going on in the background. So, that's
for John Paul. Well, John Paul is muted and he's not even showing his face. Alistair, are you here? I see Alistair's.
This is like what the students do, Alistair. Jeez.
Hey, sorry, I'm here.
Okay. We want to see you, Alistair. We don't want to see you. If you smile like that, you'll freeze up and then you look like the Joker.
Yeah, that's give me just one moment. I'll join over video in a moment.
Okay. Ebony Rose. Oh, Ebony Rose is drinking her coffee or whatever.
I have something.
Emily, go.
I will just say that I think some of these things we could do simultaneously. So for instance, if something requires or could be done through a resolution or a letter, that is something that could be done at the same time that we're doing something that might be a heavier lift. Like doing a survey or, something that required research. So maybe one of the things we could do with this chart that Caitlin shared is, I'm not saying, well, we could do it now if we wanted, but at some point soon, go through and see or discuss, like, what would it actually take? Like, could we, divide and conquer on like 3 items, or are there things that are most pressing or that are compatible? So I guess it's a question of like, how do we want to categorize? And are there things that pop out that seem like they would be, easier to categorize than other things in terms of being compatible or easy to do in a short time.
Do we need to think of the urgency? List them by urgency of.
It does seem
What-
urgent to me. Yeah.
No,
Yeah.
what I mean by urgency is like, and you know how I feel about teacher retention, but there's not, right at this moment in March, we're not gonna be able to do anything about teacher retention until we find out what teacher retention is like after this year. And I just think that I'm not, there's no mentorship programs in DCPS. There's no for principals or for teachers. There's a lot of negative parts about it, but that's way back on the back burner as far as DCPS is concerned right now. And to me, the thing that's most important is the social emotional learning, social emotional for teachers and for everybody in the building.
Yeah, I think
we
this
haven't
is
heard anything about what they're doing for teachers citywide.
so. Fraser, what would your recommendation be on what the board could do to either raise that as an issue or move that forward?
Well, we have this teacher survey that mentions something about that. And I think that should be highlighted. Also, the thing that bothers me is this learning loss or lack of plans to stop or to change it to a learning gain, which I haven't heard anything about either. And I don't know what's going to happen. Maybe we should wait until after today with the the waiver conversation, because I don't know what's going to happen. Okay, what if the federal government says we're not going to accept your waiver request? What's going to happen in the schools for the next 2 months?
So aside from the waiver request, we'll have that conversation shortly, I guess.
Right.
I think one of the things that I'm trying to organize my thoughts as far as what's possible around is the engagement with the American Rescue Plan funding. I think they're understanding that is actually there is a lot of opportunity to push for changes or resource changes we would want to see that benefit our school systems. I don't know. I think understanding like what's possible and like how our mayor is going to interact with the public and where recommendations go, like what does input and any shared decision making look like, is going to be extremely important, because the more that I learn about how the legislation itself is written, the more I come to understand that not only is it a lot of money, and I believe state and DC, since we're not a state yet, received their allocations yesterday, which means that there's a 60-day timeline for them to make some decisions with regards to some of the funding. A lot of it is super flexible. There's actually a lot less words in this legislation than most legislation passed of this size. What I anticipate we will see is that the Department of Ed will start to provide more guidance, but that hasn't happened yet. And it still is not restricted in many of the ways other funding sources are. So when we think about things like SEL, and how that can play into our response to recovery as a community. There are probably recommendations in here that could be realized with that, whether it's the recommendation from the report itself that's around a tool so we can better identify where students are, to I would really like to see probably not just DCPS, but I would really like to see districts invest in supporting educators and improving their practice around this in SEL and trauma informed instruction. So I think there are things that we should be thinking about in relation to that, because that is a whole nother engagement that has yet to be defined. Yeah, so that I don't know if that's helpful, especially because I will acknowledge that I'm still in a learning posture around it. So I'm not saying like I have all the answers to like, and you look at this provision and it's that, but that is how I'm thinking about it right now.
I think that's a great summary of what we should be doing. I think we need to focus on one thing and pound it. You know, with when we have a meeting, because we can incorporate not teacher retention with SEL, but we sure can incorporate everything else with that. And I think that as a board, it would help us a lot to be focused on something that's going to have tangible results, especially since there is a whole bucket, pardon my language about bucket, but there's a lot of money coming to the city in the next 4 weeks. And I'm afraid that money will find its way where money has always found its way, not in the right hands. So if we can just keep focusing.
Fraser.
Yeah.
And Ebony Rose, I'd be curious to hear how you're thinking about when you say pound something through, are you saying a process or a solution? Are we thinking, are we advocating for here's how we would like these federal funds to be used? Or are we saying, you know, here's what the teachers would like the funds to be used, and here's a process to engage them in deciding? Yeah,
I don't think, from what Ebony Rose was saying, I'm not talking about saying this is what we think the money should be used for. My feeling is that we need to say that there's a need for money, and we want to focus on letting everyone know that that need needs to be filled and that money is there. Not trying to be specific about necessarily even about programs, but just.
Ebony Rose, is that what you had in mind when you were sharing?
So I think about it a little differently. I think that there are things when I look at this sheet, and I will acknowledge that I was the last to fill the sheet out. So I could probably use some more time going back through it. When I look at things that are actionable, that people listed as actionable, I think lifting some of those up is how we should be spending this money is a specific opportunity. I will acknowledge that more generally, I do have a concern around what are the input and feedback processes, and what does engagement look like around the funding more generally. So I am someone who would like to see it made clear what the process looks like for DC, because there's been no, to my knowledge, guidance around that. I do want that more generally, but in absence of that, I see this as an opportunity to really resource some things that are not just like, okay, we're gonna buy this program and put it on the shelf, or buy this program and it responds to this thing, but like to start to pivot toward things that could just improve our, just be an improvement overall, like kind of that bridge from recovery to maybe not quite reimagining, but make our system better.
Can I
I think-
apologize.
Sorry.
And
Sorry.
Alistair, can I just break in for 1 second? I do want to make sure that that the committee is focused a little bit on the work plan and what this committee is going to be working on for the next year. And I think this part of the conversation may be delving a little bit further into, once we've made those decisions, this is how we're going to sort of approach them. And I think this conversation is exactly sort of one of the things that this committee could explore, right? How is the federal money being used? How do we track it? How do we keep it accountable? And how do we make sure that it's going to the things that we think and teachers think is the most important? I think that is a really great action item for this committee. I just want to make sure that we're focusing on creating what those action items are for the work plan, so that we can have that ready for the working session.
So John Paul, if I may jump in there actually and just share with folks, in the task force, we are planning to propose for April 7th some kind of survey of principals actually around to gather their feedback around how that pool of money you're mentioning, Ebony Rose, is used, so that they get some feedback on how that, where that should be spent. And so, if we're thinking about this as a broader engagement process, and we think that kind of zooming out now to what John Paul is, I think, asking us to do, in thinking about, are we at this level of analysis, are we proposing a sort of similar kind of engagement process of educators alongside principals, right? So then the task force and this committee are working together to gather feedback around how that federal funding is spent. Are we thinking more about ourselves as, sorry, John Paul, is that the right level of analysis?
I don't think so, because I'm sorry, but we've already done that. That's what the survey is. And we've highlighted
but it's not focusing on how that money is spent, right?
Well, that's why I'm a little confused. And I guess I would like to, actually what John Paul said about creating a tracker is the most concrete thing I've heard so far about an action. And that would be an interesting thing to discuss. Could we do that? Is that what we want to do? Otherwise, what are we saying about the money? Like with the principal project, I understand we're creating I think, recommendations based on what we learn principals believe the money should be spent on, right? Here, I think we're saying is something similar, but we have the data already because we have the teacher survey, right? I mean, isn't that, and so I guess, Ebony Rose, what is the action, the line of action you're thinking about between that, what we've highlighted, and the funding piece?
So I think a couple things. I think that, yeah, you're right. We've already done a survey to ask teachers what we think is important. I don't know and Alistair, I think, is the only member on this committee that's on the COVID committee. I don't know what the questions they're asking. I mean, we could learn some things.
Actually, we all are except you.
Oh, okay. Well, yeah. So I don't know I don't have an opinion on if that's helpful or not. I do think that what John Paul said is we don't have a work plan yet. And so at that level, we need to define like what our overall compass is for this. I think for me, and I was mostly responding to, it might have been you, Emily, that said, you and Fraser were talking about prioritizing. And like for me, things that we can lift up as part of this, like when we start to, as we spend this money from the survey is actionable, I think some of those things could be funded through that. And so I was offering that more so as a lens of like, this could be a priority item for us because there is this opportunity. And so which, yes, is an action, I think, would be an action in our work plan, identifying what items, what items could be resourced or however we want to worded. But that
Gotcha.
is probably a click down from like how we decide what goes into our overall work plan. Is that right, John Paul? Yeah.
Yeah, and I think too, I mean, I think in the document that Caitlin put together and shared, there's some really, really great information there about things that could be actionized into something. So why don't I try to bring the attention back to that document, especially in the chart where she's talking about the topics, the problems, and the actionable items. Maybe it would help if we can go through, sorry, Satsfress is not pleased. Maybe if we can go through that a little bit and sort of talk through the specifics and figure out if there's anything there that we say, yes, absolutely, this needs to be an actionable item for this committee, and we want to try to do it within the next 6 months, within 4 months, something like that. Because that's what we'll need to do to have ready for the working session is that work plan of the ideas that we think are ready or that we want to work on, and a basic timeline, and noting that the timeline will likely have to be adjusted at some points.
Okay, so while you were saying that, I was sort of going down, should we go down the actionable items on these charts and sort of thumb up, thumb down on them? So we can have, because I'm feeling this pressure about an action plan, the construction of it, because I don't know how to do that. So I'm is that all right with everybody, just quickly?
Hard.
Okay, so why don't we'll start with the social emotional learning, since the first one on there. And like the first one is a possible recommendation is implementing an SEL screening tool across the district so that the target SEL support is feasible. Does that sound like something that we could put our hands on or not?
DCPS does use a survey. I don't know if they're,
Yeah, but the DCPS survey is garbage.
Are we talking about the Panorama Survey?
that's the Panorama, the thing.
The
that's
insight survey.
The Panorama Survey is school culture survey, not a SEL. Not like a person, an individual. This is where I am with my social emotional skills.
I think it's both.
But
Because
I don't trust any of those. Teachers are afraid of those surveys, even though they're supposed to be anonymous. I couldn't do a survey because they ask you, how long have you been teaching and what race are you and what do you teach? Okay, if I put 40 white and English, there were I was 2 people that were 40 white and English and the males. It wasn't an anonymous survey anymore. And I just,
okay.
because we have the information on the survey.
So could we do something different? I guess that's does that make sense, or is that too heavy a lift? That seems expensive to me and time consuming to create.
No, I agree. I'm just saying thumbs up or thumbs down.
Yeah,
Let's
I'm
go
just
down.
thinking through it.
I'm a thumbs down person for that.
So maybe, yeah.
Ebony Rose, how do you feel?
Sorry, I'm looking at the Panorama Survey because I think I understood it as a school culture thing, which is different than what we would need. So I would never say yes, let's go create something if it already exists. So
I think there's a section in the Panorama that has do you feel there's a breakdown of belonging, the DCPS,
your approach to learning, your relationships with others, those types of questions.
Okay, well, why don't we go to the third bullet. The third bullet says make recommendations that items specific to distance learning and pandemic related trauma be added to the Panorama assessment tool.
Make recommendations.
I read that as an advocacy. It's not that we create the tool, but that we advocate that it gets included and that then OSSE
Right.
creates a tool, no?
Yeah, we wouldn't create, I don't think we're supposed to be creating stuff. We're advising,
So
we're
I
sort of
think,
giving the information out.
Yeah, John Paul's, I think that's right. So the action items would be, or our work plan would be, figure out what exists, figure out how educators are currently assessing, and then kind of think through what our advocacy from there is.
Yeah,
Yeah, I mean, yeah. So, and it's not just good enough for DCPS to have something.
right.
So that's the
right.
other,
It's got to be for both.
because we have only half our
Yeah.
kids in here.
And that's part of that bullet too, the same one that Fraser was talking about to make
Yeah, I
it.
just didn't get to the charter thing.
Yeah.
The fourth bullet says also actionable regarding the tool and increased teacher supports to meet need investments in more professional learning opportunities to benefit in-person and virtual instruction, which sort of gets into advising that would get into money.
Yeah,
What-
I wrote that.
Yeah.
So,
What,
like,
yeah, go ahead.
I wrote that because one of the things that the teacher said was 45% of teachers cited needed support
Right.
for addressing social and emotional needs. And so I would like to see DCPS think about like what investments in educator practice they can make, DCPS and everybody else, that they can offer to teachers so they feel supported and confident in including that as part of their practice. And I feel like when I sat through I think I noted this last time, but when we sat through that SEL presentation, it was all like external stuff. It wasn't stuff that they were saying like, and we're going to help the teachers do this.
But what could we actually do? What is our action here?
So in the chat, I suggested two potentials for this. One would be, should we identify potential opportunities for this type of SEL training? Or the opposite, the sort of more basic would be, we would identify what we believe are the characteristics of the type of training that needs to be done, right? Like, what does it mean to have effective SEL PD, and encourage the LEAs to search training that does that?
I think it's the latter, actually, because I don't take for granted that that's how DCPS is thinking about. It's like, to me, from that presentation, that's not how they were thinking about SEL. So I think it's the latter, and I don't know for individual charter LEAs how they think about it, but I'm someone who errs on the side of like, we should all know what we mean when we say things.
It sounds to me like that could be actually a really powerful thing, right? A tangible thing that says good SEL, the state board believes good SEL PD would have the following things, right? As a minimum of what we think that all LEAs in the state should be doing. I think that could be something really, really interesting.
And it also ties into school climate perfectly. And I think that we want to, I mean, I beat the new reality to death, but I don't trust the system to spend this huge amount of money on anything but recycling what was going on before the pandemic. And I think that this money should be spent on the future rather than the past. And that we've got to push with all of our collective strength to make sure that the systems are looking forward rather than backwards. Because I hope that I know that that's a real struggle for people who are entrenched in their jobs to ever think with forward thinking. because they're comfortable where they are. And the principals
Yeah.
aren't comfortable and the teachers aren't comfortable.
Again.
And the students, we don't have the 10,000 students in the building now. And it's not going to get a whole lot more. I think we need to push.
Yeah.
I think I agree, Fraser. I think I'm still not sure if we have 30 minutes to figure out how, right? How do we push?
So maybe, I mean, I do think there's value in first finding out if Panorama is, I'm assuming it's being administered this year,
Yeah.
but if I wonder if they have tailored it at all for this year. If there are different questions. So that's something I haven't looked at.
Can we pull that up?
Yeah. And then I just was looking at something that I thought, I think that the question about, is there a way to do something citywide, that's not just DCPS and then counting on each LEA to do their own? That makes it harder than to be able to, I don't know, I guess. I mean, I think the charter argument is they will take care of their own. But it would be good to have something we can look at citywide to see, how our students are doing, how our teachers are doing.
As far as a tool or as far as like a standard?
Well, I think if that's a really good question. I mean,
Because I
do
feel
we
like we have both on the table. Yeah.
Yeah. And it's hard you can have a standard, but it doesn't mean a lot if you can't assess it, right? So I don't know what the standard for teachers is right now in terms of SEL.
I don't think I think so. I know that there are kind of frameworks and that type of stuff out there, but I don't think we have an adopted standard as a district.
Right.
So I think that's important. I haven't, like you, I haven't intimately enough explored the Panorama Survey to have an opinion on like if it's good or bad or whatever, like if it actually, but like I think looking this idea of like seeing if a good SEL tool exists, and at least making it available. I mean, maybe since we don't have authority, sometimes it's a coalition of the willing, sometimes it's informing and just making resources available, because there are things that are open source too.
And maybe that's the thing. Maybe, I mean, ultimately, what do you do once you find out? Like, let's say there is something on Panorama this year that's different based on the crisis. What I think the more important question is, then what, right? And we know that folks need, I don't know, that there's going to be a range of needs that have been exacerbated, that have been, that weren't there before. And I wonder if maybe it makes more sense to look into, I don't know, what already exists that we could maybe provide as a resource. Like you're saying, this is something that schools can access, and it's focused on SEL for teachers. I don't know. I'm thinking out loud. I don't necessarily think that's a great idea, as I say it. So I'm struggling a little bit, I guess, with the action item. Like, what is it? Maybe we should go to the next one. Maybe we should come back to SEL.
I don't.
John Paul, do you have a suggestion for what the steps would be for this?
I mean, I don't know. And I think maybe not knowing is okay. And maybe one of the action items is figuring out what we can do, what we as a state board should do in this, what, what does it mean? I mean, you know, one of the options is to if we do end up having a statewide survey, you know, maybe what we do is put that information on the report card, right? Put some of the results of that onto the report card, and so that parents have access to it in the same way as they do everything else. I mean, I think there's a lot of different potential methods, and I think one of the challenges that we're having right now is the fact that we just don't know what the landscape looks like yet.
Mhm.
And so we can't really figure out what an action item is on this yet. We know
Is
we
that-
want to work on it, but we don't know what it's going to be yet.
Is that something that, I mean, that's how I feel. We don't know the enemy right now. And we'll probably know more about it once money comes in and stuff. I just, I mean, what I'm in the back of my head, I'm thinking that maybe we need to meet one more time before the business meeting, but maybe not. But we also, when we're talking about a plan, I mean, I think that everything that's come out today has been really helpful to me as far as trying to focus a push on more social and emotional learning. But I don't know how that fits into something that we present as a plan. I
I
think
feel
that
like we're, oh, sorry, Fraser, go ahead.
the in the left-hand box that Caitlin did on the first page, it's in blue on my sheet, and it says a possible recommendation is implementing an SEL screening tool across the district so that targeted SEL support is feasible. And it's got all of y'all's initials under it, right? I mean, I think that's one strong part of a plan, but we haven't fleshed it out, right? Is that enough for the beginning of a plan, John Paul?
I mean, yeah.
You're on mute. Oh.
Yeah, I think it can be, right? Like, I think you're right. I mean, we just don't know enough to know what we need to or can do on this yet. And I think that's probably one of the issues too that DCPS and the charter LEAs are also struggling with, right? Like, how do you do this well? Like, I think there's certainly some, you know, like I shared the information related to the community schools work that's going on around SEL for teachers at Tubman. I mean, I think there's some really good examples of how this can be done. Is it right for every school community? I don't know. Like, I'm not in every school community, so I don't know.
I mean, I agree, because I mean, when I first started teaching, I was in a community school, and it was a real community school with parents working in the building every day and everything. I mean, everybody knew, like, if somebody's mother was in the school and little Johnny was doing something bad, little Johnny's mother found out about that from her best friend who was working in the school. And there were all kinds, and it was really successful. But that's just one thing. We don't have any ammo right now, except that it's not being done.
Maybe for our first action, we should do something that's an easy lift. You know, I think we have, like I said in the chat, we have a limited set of tools at our disposal, actually, I think. So we can make recommendations, we can collect data, we can make recommendations, we can, I don't know, we can create tools and resources. And I think, you know, if going through the spreadsheet here, you know, there's several places where we could definitely start with, you know, a resolution or a letter that has recommendations based on what we do know right now.
I like that as an action step, Emily.
From the survey, right? We have a survey with data. Can we lift that data and create one or two resolutions to start? And then I think moving from there, we can maybe get into the more complex stuff. I mean, I just feel like it's really hard in this meeting to do it. I need to like, like Ebony Rose, I haven't really looked at this closely enough and tried to think about, I have a sense that we could create a timeline and actually address several of these things over time. But I'm having a hard time wrapping my mind around like doing something. I think we're trying to do something really useful, and I don't think we're there yet. That's all. And we have a limited set of tools to work with. So my sense is like we could maybe start with a resolution. That's my proposal. And thank you for the vote of confidence, Alistair.
I think there's a lot of appropriateness in this committee in particular, presenting a work plan that has a lot of question marks in it, right? Like, 'cause we're just not sure yet what we're going to do, because we just got the report. We're still looking through it. We're trying to figure out what's going to happen. And I think that's absolutely fine. My suggestion then would be that we submit a work plan that says, these are the topic areas that we think we want to work on, but we're not at a place yet that we can say we're going to work on this and not this. And so present to the board even maybe this document and say, this is what we've been thinking of. If there's other things that you think we should be considering too, let me know or let us know. I think one of the things that this relates back to the Education Standards Committee work is related to teacher certification and the literacy piece, right? Like, there's information that we just found from the, I don't remember which group it was in.
Yeah, the national survey.
Yeah, the national survey that showed that DC has some of the worst, teacher certification or teacher data or teacher requirements for teaching of literacy, right?
Yep.
That may be something that we also want to work on in this committee in terms of teacher certification.
Very interested. Yes, I spoke with Mary today about the DC Reading Clinic, and honestly would love to have that as part of our work plan to be supporting their efforts, right? Her goal is to move us to a point where, any educator who teaches reading in DC has the option, at least, not only to complete that. So the DC Reading Clinic is our kind of DC way of doing it, but there's a national gold standard called Letters. That's a 2-year course, professional training course for how to teach reading that, I think would be an amazing thing for us to work towards. So if John Paul, I mean, if for, what I'm hearing is for, at least we should be leveraging this survey, right? It's such an asset. How do we leverage that to think through our letters or resolutions based on some of the findings of the letter? I think is one piece, and I would love to also think through how we, because the board does have statutory power in thinking about teacher certification, how do we engage with OSCE in thinking through, and educators in thinking through how we revise some of the certification requirements around literacy?
Yeah, and I think even, I think that will be an interesting, certainly something interesting to look at that could have significant ramifications for our students, which would, is kind of the goal. So
can I ask where the research that I think we're deciding to do with Mary Levy fits in? Is that in this committee, or is that something else, or is that?
That's another really great point that I'm glad you brought up. So we have spoken to Mary Levy about potentially doing a third round of the teacher retention report that she's done for us twice already. We do have a cost estimate of that, which is $6,000. And so it should come, I think, from this committee as a recommendation to move forward with that if we want to do that.
And that would be from last year's 2019, 2020.
Yes.
And how much do we have in the bank?
It's a complicated subject.
Well, that's for us to decide together on April 7th, right? And how we fund every committee, right?
Yeah.
Right,
So
exactly.
we can put it forward as a possibility. I mean, I think, so that would be doing similar, just updating basically the data, right, John Paul? Yeah. I mean, I honestly, I think that the state board has gotten a lot of, I think it's appreciated. I think that the work that we've done around teacher retention is at this point anticipated and appreciated. So I would recommend doing it. And you know, we could say we made a decision here.
I
So,
agree. I agree with
very
Emily.
solid.
But I think that
That's my pitch.
I don't have a clock on my computer, so I don't know how much time we have left.
We have 10 minutes. Well, 9
Okay.
really. We probably should.
We need to,
Can we make it 6 so we can have 5 minutes between meetings?
yeah, no, we got
That's
5
okay.
minutes. We have 5 minutes, Evan.
Okay.
Okay.
I mean, I would agree that having like updating that makes sense, in particularly because of the survey finding of how many people considered quitting this year,
Yes.
Oh, yeah.
just walking away. And so I would say that, yeah, we should keep that going.
But we got to come up, should we meet before the next meeting? And
I
try
don't
to,
know how productive that's going to be, Fraser. I mean,
I
we're going to
have-
have the same questions,
Yeah.
no?
well, but no, the problem, Alistair, is not everyone has read the information. So that, and I think we need to have what John Paul was talking about a generic kind of a plan, which is fine with me, with questions, which is fine with me. I don't have a problem. I'm not, this isn't my baby. This is our baby. So I'm not taking credit for anything or taking responsibility for it, but I just would like, but we don't have to have a meeting. We can talk online and whatever.
So
about
can
it.
I make a suggestion? Then why don't Caitlin and I get together and debrief from this meeting, put together sort of what we've talked about, and send it out to you guys before the weekend, and then that way you have the weekend to look at it, and then Monday you can respond with questions or thoughts or yay or nay from it, and then we can go from there.
Good. But we're agreeing. What I'm hearing is we've agreed on 2 things. We've agreed on a report about the teacher retention, and we've agreed on social emotional learning is going to be the thrust right away, and literacy, social emotional learning and literacy are the 2. So
I
that's
would say
3.
those are just the 2 things we talked about. I guess I would propose maybe going through the document and seeing what we as individuals might be interested in actually working on. Would that make sense? And then
Sure.
kind of, yeah, because I know Alistair has made really clear that he's interested in working on the literacy piece.
Yeah, but he's interested in other stuff too. So I'm not trying to put anybody.
Yeah. But I think for me anyway, I'll just speak for myself. Like I would like to wrap my mind around what it would mean. I just put down ideas of what would be actionable. I didn't think through does this make sense for me or even for the state board to actually work on?
That's fine.
Just because it's feasible doesn't mean it makes sense for us to do it or that we have the bandwidth or the time or the resources to do it. So I think that's where I am, is like, I need to go through and that's the next step for me, is to go through and look at what both makes sense for us as a board and for me as somebody who, is going to be helping to work on this.
Okay, why don't we do it this way then? John Paul and Caitlin are going to get back to us, and we're going to debrief what they get back to us with. And then we'll find out where everybody is by Wednesday of next week, John Paul?
Wednesday of next week is probably like the last time that we would be able to take something and have it ready for the working session.
Okay, Tuesday then.
Okay.
Tuesday of next week.
So what I heard was John Paul offered to distill this conversation for us and produce something, and that we were also going to commit to reviewing the document and kind of wrapping our heads around not just what was actionable, but what we thought to be feasible for us, and what we are interested in working on. One thing I would like, and I'm comfortable with that. One thing I would like to raise that I have a question around is this digital divide question. Because even though it's something that came up in the survey, I'm not completely sure if it fits squarely into educator practice. I do think it's important as far as just life. Like, I mean, I think the digital
Sure.
is so much bigger than,
Yeah, I agree
like,
completely.
you know, whether it's being able to provide quality instruction or teachers feeling comfortable with tools and all those things. Literally, it is how we live. So I do want to raise that as like something that I think is important, something I don't want to be like a missed opportunity, but I'm not completely sure if or where it fits, not just within the committee, but within any actions from the state board.
What I would suggest actually would be, I agree with you that I think it's something really, really important. What I would suggest is raising it as an item at the working session on April 7th as something the state board needs to work on, and figuring out then which committee is going to work on it. Or is it just going to be something that we handle at the full state board level, which is also fine. But I think you're right.
Oh, I know you're right, because there are still students who haven't gone online yet. And there are hundreds and hundreds of students who their teacher has never seen on the screen.
So I apologize, but we do have to end this meeting because I have to get the other one prepared, and we can't be on 2 Zooms at the same time.
I know.
So we will see you all in 4 minutes.
Technology.
I know.
you.
That's what we should work toward. No, sorry. Okay, bye.
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 See you in 5 minutes.